First on today's list is the Pretoria, an American schooner barge which was considered to be one of the largest wooden ships ever constructed on the Great Lakes. The Pretoria came in at a length of 338 feet. She had a width of 44 feet, a depth of 23, and she had 3 masts on her. She was built in 1900 in West Bay City, Michigan by James Davidson. Being that the Pretoria was a massive wooden schooner barge, she would need extra steel to help strengthen her wooden hull. The Pretoria was constructed using steel keelson plates. She also had steel cords and steel arches. She was also additionally strapped diagonally with more steel. Due to the Pretoria's size, she would also need a donkey engine to run a pump to keep her interior dry. A steam donkey engine would be a steam-powered winch. This would be used in logging, mining, and maritime use. A newspaper article from the Saginaw, Michigan newspaper, the Courier-Herald, describes the Pretoria's launch on July 26th of 1900, and I quote, "The schooner Pretoria, the largest wooden boat ever built, was launched at Davidson's shipyard this afternoon. This in the presence of a vast multitude. The Pretoria will carry 5,000 tons of iron ore and 175,000 bushels of wheat, or 300,000 bushels of oats." End quote. September 1st, 1905. The Pretoria had just finished getting a load of iron ore on her at Superior, Wisconsin. She would be towed by the steamer Venezuela. As they departed Superior, Wisconsin, another notable ship, the lake freighter Savona, was also out on the lakes with them. She too would take on cargo at the same pier shortly after the Pretoria. As the vessels made their way out onto Lake Superior, a storm came out of nowhere and hit them. As the storm began to swell and batter against the Pretoria and the Venezuela, along with the Savona out there as well, the Pretoria's hydraulic steering gear failed, and the tow line between the Pretoria and the Venezuela parted. The Venezuela then returned to Ashland and reported that the Pretoria was missing. After the parting of the tow line, the Pretoria was left to drift towards the Apostle Islands, and she would be slowly and surely torn apart by the waves that crashed against her. Because of the present situation and the worsening of the storm, Captain Smart made the call to drop anchor. However, she didn't catch until within 1.5 miles of the outer island on the Apostle Islands. The Pretoria continued to be battered throughout the storm, and eventually she began to disintegrate at the anchor. This caused water to come in through the hatch combings and forced some of the hatches off. After constant battling of wind and waves from the storm and the Pretoria beginning to disintegrate, Captain Smart and 9 other crew members finally made the decision to abandon ship. Into the lifeboat they went. However, it would be overturned in the surf of Outer Island, and 5 crew members drowned and did not make it. The surviving crew members eventually made it to Outer Island, and then were taken to the Outer Island Lighthouse, being rescued. The Pretoria, on the other hand, finally foundered and sank. She would settle on the bottom in around 54 feet of water, and her long masts protruded above the surface. Today, the Pretoria is still there, although she's been largely salvaged. Her broken hull is in 3 major pieces, and this consists of the bilge, port, and starboard sides. There's also a lot more debris from the Pretoria that has been scattered on the bottom in her debris field. The Lucerne was a commercial schooner on the Great Lakes. She would come in with a length of 195 feet, and she would have a tonnage of 728 gross tons. She also could carry up to 10 crew members at a time aboard her. The Lucerne was launched on April 23rd of 1873, and she was operated by Captain George S. Lloyd, and her skipper was William Mack. William Mack was also a part owner of the Lucerne. The Lucerne would carry cargo of iron ore, and her home port would be Ashland, Wisconsin. After her being launched and finished on April 23rd of 1873, she would have a cost of $55,000 for completion. On November 15th, 1886, the Lucerne was loaded down with her typical cargo of iron ore. This was at her home port, Ashland, Wisconsin. The Lucerne was to deliver her cargo of iron ore to Cleveland, Ohio. She would then, after the delivery, make her voyage back to Ashland. At the time of her return journey, the Lucerne had brand new canvas sails put on her. She would then be met with a light wind that began to blow. Skies and seas were clear, and the signs pointed to a speedy voyage home for the captain and the crew members. However, such as the usual fate for many vessels upon the Great Lakes, a November snowstorm began to blow and brew, and the lake that night became violent. Throughout the night, Lake Superior showed no mercy to the Lucerne, just trying to make her way back to Ashland. The Lucerne lost her flight to the blizzard, snow, and wind and waves of Lake Superior. This violent storm caused the Lucerne to sink off of Long Island. Another vessel who reported during the height of the storm, the captain of the ship, Fred Kelly, had actually seen the Lucerne. However, Fred Kelly unfortunately could not offer any aid to the Lucerne. Obviously, this being because of the blizzardous conditions out on Lake Superior that night. There were no witnesses of the Lucerne's descent into Lake Superior, and her last final minutes may forever be a mystery. As she sank, none of her crew members survived. All 10 perished. After the Lucerne failed to check in, William Mack, the part owner of her, began to become worried. He would then go to Telegraph Bayfield, Wisconsin, and ask for a search vessel to be sent out onto Lake Superior to look for the Lucerne. The boat, S.B. Barker, was dispatched promptly into Lake Superior to look for the missing Lucerne. As they began their search, they actually did not have to go very far before they came upon wreckage of the Lucerne in Lake Superior. As the S.B. Barker and her crew discovered wreckage from the Lucerne, they finally discovered 3 masts which were sticking out of the water of Lake Superior. The Barker and the crew moved closer to the 3 masts sticking out of Lake Superior, and as they approached, the ship's crew members on the Barker saw a horrific sight. Clinging to the 3 masts of the Lucerne sticking out from Lake Superior were 3 crew members, frozen solid in 3 inches of ice, covered all over them. These poor crew members had perished sometime during the night as they had tried to frantically escape the sinking of the Lucerne. However, it's more than likely that they did not survive due to the wind and waves and the freezing cold temperatures of Lake Superior during the blizzard overnight. These poor men had tried their best to survive and wait out the storm while clinging to the masts, and waited to be rescued. They did not make it. The crew members from the Barker then removed the 3 bodies clinging to the masts of the Lucerne. However, the other 7 crew members' bodies were never found, and more than likely were at the bottom of Lake Superior with the Lucerne. They would then take the 3 bodies back to Bayfield. The St. Peter schooner. This three-masted schooner was built in 1873, and she had a length of 135 feet. She had a beam of 26 feet, and her depth was 12.1 feet. The St. Peter schooner could carry a cargo of 607 short tons, or 542 long tons of chestnut coal. This would be the very same cargo that she would be carrying on her fateful journey. In the late afternoon hours of October 26, 1898, the St. Peter was out sailing in southeastern Lake Ontario. This was just off the coast of New York, and she was westbound for Toledo, Ohio. The St. Peter was out with her usual cargo of chestnut coal. Her journey started off fine, until she encountered a blizzard with gale-force winds. The seas began to rage to over 20 feet, and with wind gusts of over 70 miles an hour. The captain of the St. Peter made the decision to turn eastward in order to run with the wind of the storm. This would turn into a 12-hour overnight battle against the wind and waves and blizzard conditions that night. And then, on the early morning hours of October 27, 1898, the battle was over. The St. Peter rolled on her side and sank off of Bear Creek on the coast of New York. This was just west of Sodus Bay and 16 miles east of the Charlotte Life-Saving Station in Charlotte, New York. However, as this was happening, a United States Life-Saving Service rescue boat began to approach the St. Peter. As the crew members from the Life-Saving Service boat approached the St. Peter, they found the captain unconscious and clinging to a spar. They also found the captain's wife and 4 other crew members, who, unfortunately, did not survive the night. The St. Peter would come to sink in 117 feet of water at the bottom of Lake Ontario. She sits now upright and is in pretty good condition. Her deck and lower hull are still intact. She would be later discovered in 1971, and she is just northeast of Pointeville, New York. Our last story takes us back to November 10th, 1913, and as you can tell by the date, this was during the horrific blizzard that would ravage across the Great Lakes. Over 12 vessels would be lost during the 1913 storm, and over 250 people would lose their lives across the Great Lakes. We've covered many ship stories from the 1913 blizzard. However, there is one small ship who has still not had a proper story and a respectful telling. This last ship would be known as the Lightship number 82, or the United States Lightship Buffalo LV-82. This is her story. The LV-82 was launched in 1911. She had a length of 95 feet, a beam of 21 feet, and a height of 10 feet. The LV-82 was a lightship. This would be a vessel that would act as a lighthouse in areas where there could not be a proper lighthouse constructed or built for other vessels out on the Great Lakes. This would often be considered a dangerous job for the crew members aboard these lightships out on the open Great Lakes. The LV-82 was built by the Racine Truscott Shell Lake Boat Company in Muskegon, Michigan, and she cost $42,910 for completion. For installed power, she had a 14-foot diameter or 120 psi boiler steam engine, and for propulsion she had a cast iron propeller on her. She could also carry a crew of 6 aboard her. These lightships were actually quite comfortable to be on for their service. The captain of LV-82 was Captain Hugh Williams of Manistee, Michigan. Andrew Lay of Elrea, Ohio, if I'm saying that correctly, was the mate. Charles Butler of Buffalo, New York, was chief engineer, and Cornelius Lay of Elrea, Ohio as well was his assistant. Peter Mackey of Buffalo was the cook, and the final 6th member of the LV-82 was Seaman William Jensen of Muskegon, Michigan. As these men were stationed aboard LV-82, they would have no idea what would be coming upon them on November 10th of 1913. For these 6 men, it would end in tragedy. Many vessels during the November 10th, 1913 storm, both during night and day, would at least be able to try and fight their way through the storm, even though they would either sink or be destroyed, losing most if not all of their crew members. But they could at least try and fight for their survival. The same could not be said for Captain Williams and his crew, as they were especially duty-bound to remain aboard their vessel and on station during these types of storms. These lightships would be in place to warn other vessels of impending dangers, and for their position it would be off of Abino Point, Ontario, in eastern Lake Erie. This was across from Point Sturgeon, New York, just 13 miles from Buffalo Harbor. It is reported that Captain Williams and his crew members did not make any attempts to leave the LV-82, this being again because they were duty-bound to remain aboard to warn other ships, being that they were a lighthouse station ship. The first signs of distress for LV-82 were received by Roscoe House. He was the lighthouse inspector of the 10th District of Buffalo, New York, and he was at his home Tuesday morning, November 11th, and it was around 8:15 in the morning. There would be a telephone message from the Buffalo Evening News to the effect that a life buoy bearing the light vessels LV-82's marks and other small pieces of wreckage would be found and picked up on the beach inside of the Buffalo Breakwater. The discovery of this life buoy and other pieces of wreckage from the LV-82 were very distressing. However, this was not considered to be exactly conclusive evidence that the ship herself had been disabled or sunk. Many of the people determined that these articles and pieces of wreckage could have been easily washed off her deck. During the storm and in the early morning hours, it was also reported that there were no whistles or distress bombs or rocket flares that had been fired or seen in the vicinity of the LV-82's location during the storm. The tug Yale was sent out and chartered to look for the LV-82, as she had ridden out the storm throughout the night. It was noted here that there was every effort humanly possible made that day to look for the LV-82 and rescue her 6 crewmen. The lightship Crocus and the tug Yale as well were sent out to search for the missing lightship LV-82. After only finding small pieces of wreckage, the Crocus returned at around 1:45 p.m., and she had reported finding no trace of the LV-82 or her 6 crew members. Shortly after this, the tug Yale also returned and had no reports of any findings from the LV-82. Finally, on May 13, 1914, the wreckage of the LV-82 lightship was located 2 miles from her assigned location in 63 feet of water. There would be 2 failed salvage attempts on her. However, shortly after this, LV-82 was then raised from the bottom of Lake Erie. It would be done using pontoons, and she would then be sent to be refurbished. The LV-82 was in service up until 1936, and then, being that she was decommissioned, she would be docked. Following the decommissioning of the LV-82 in 1936, she was decommissioned with her papers signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. She was to be moved to a VFW post in Massachusetts. However, this would never happen, as the LV-82 was burnt at her dock by random vandals. And then, after her being severely damaged by the burning and fire, she was considered a total loss and then scrapped. The last note to make here of the LV-82 is only one body, the body of Chief Engineer Charles Butler, was ever found and recovered. The other 5 were never found. A sad and tragic ending to the light vessel LV-82. And with that, I bring this video to a close. Well, everyone, I thank you so very much in joining me again on today's episode of Songs of the Great Lakes, the Forgotten Ships Part 4. These vessels were all these vessels I had never heard of. Maybe you guys have heard of them, but I certainly have not, and I felt compelled again to create another episode for this series. We'll see if I make a Forgotten Ships Part 5, but yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. The Pretoria was especially an interesting one, but so were the others, and I make this video in absolute respect and honor for all these crew members that were lost on these vessels. And if you guys have any additional information for either of them, any of them, please do feel free to comment down below, or even if I need corrections in pronunciations of locations, I always look for that as constructive criticism. But yeah, what a bunch of wild stories, and just sad, tragic endings, and I refuse to let any of these vessels be forgotten or lost to time and history, and I hope this short video for all of them gives them its due honor and respect. But with that being said, guys, I thank you again so very much in joining me on today's episode on Songs of the Great Lakes, and do look forward to the next one on the next episode. Until then, God bless you all.